The only thing that doesn't go in the grave with you is how you made other people feel around you. And I think a lot of people go through life without knowing about their values. Our purpose should be more than just making the good grades, getting the good job, earning the big money. You know, life is really short. And if it's all you're trying to get, then you'll get a huge disappointment. I go in and one of the first things I tell the parties is that even though I'm getting paid by one of you, I'm only loyal to my values. The problem we are talking about, or the huge conflict we are talking about now, I usually go back and see that it started with a minor thing that was maybe a little uncomfortable, which everybody was hoping would go away. And then this just snowballs, you know, and it evolves to this huge problem.
Sam Sorodi, thank you so much for being here. First, I wanted just to hear a bit about your background, your journey. How did you end up as a mentor? What was your motivation? What's your background?
Well, thank you so much for having me. Well, how did I end up as a mentor? That's how long time do we have? But to give you the short answer, growing up in Norway was we had focused on, as a foreigner myself, we were focusing on doing the things that needed to be done to get where we needed to be. Since I'm from Iran, and Iran is a lot of people from Iran, they are really goal-oriented on getting places, and my upbringing wasn't much different. We had to get good grades, we had to do good, and we had to get good jobs and earn money. But after a while, when you grow up and start reflecting on the issues in life, you get to learn that being successful doesn't necessarily mean that you're happy. So when that dawned on me, I found out that trying to make people that are in need of assistance, trying to make them happier, or trying to help them get along and get further, that gives the things that you can't achieve only by being successful, and that's happiness. So long story short, for me it was the feeling of trying to help people with whatever I can to help them get places. That's a short story.
And you have worked a lot as a leader, and now you are coaching and coursing leaders.
Yes.
In difficult conversations, especially relating to sick leave, conflicts at work, etc. How is this transferable to the mentor role and vice versa?
I've been working as a leader for 15 plus years. And when you work as a leader, you tend to get into a lot of conversations with a lot of people. And those conversations are in different settings and have different themes. So you get to know people, both in good times and in rough times. So, and as a leader, knowing how to adjust your tone of voice, how you adjust your body language and the conversations you're having, so that it doesn't do harm for a situation or a person. That's a skill that you learn after a while. And that is also very relevant in coaching and being a mentor, because you meet people in different settings. You meet people that are maybe trying to get a job for last 2 years. They are really down. They are maybe depressed. How you talk to those people and how you talk to people who maybe just got a job offer and need a little bit more pep talk on how to do the final things, and those conversations need to be different. You can't go with the same enthusiasm in the conversation with the person who is like 2 years away from jobs, getting rejections, you can't go in the same mental state in those conversations that you can go in the conversation that you have with a person who just got a dream job, and needs a little adjustment to nail it, So you have to adjust, and it's all about you. Yeah.
I think that really speaks to the essence of mentoring. One thing that we talk a lot with the mentors about is good practices and bad practices within mentoring, or not bad, but like desirable practices, which is listening perhaps more than you're talking yourself, asking questions, etc., and then the whole list. But we also talk a lot about the fact that there is not one answer that's true all the time, because every job seeker, every process is different. So I think this really speaks to that.
And I think the ability to adjust to the other person, both as a leader and as a mentor, I think that's and of course as a coach. I think that's I think if I could choose one skill that I would use, I think that would be it. Because it should never be about me. It should always be about the employee, the coachee, the mentee. I'm not here to make it about me. I need to see what is the need of the other person and how can I be of assistance for that person. And to be of assistance, you need to listen, you need to read the room, and you need to read the situation. And that's also a really practical skill for these conflict conversations that I usually help leaders and HR with. Sometimes people show a lot of feelings, a lot of reactions. Some get mad, some get angry, some get sad, and you should be tuned in to handle those kind of reactions, or else the conversation might go one way with the one who gets mad and the other way with the one who gets sad. And that's not how it's supposed to be,
And how do you tune in to the difficult emotions? And I'm thinking particularly in a Norwegian context, we are not very used to be open to show, not strangers, but semi-strangers or anyone sometimes, that you're sad or that you're upset. So then if you as a mentor encounter this in a meeting, I think that's one of the most difficult parts of the mentor role, how to adjust and to respond adequately to that?
That's a great question, Alan. I've lived here since '89, so I guess it's approximately 40 years, and I've grown up in Norway. A couple of years ago, I saw a book that was in a coffee shop about the different states of Norwegians' mood, and it was really simple. It was like 5 faces, all of them with a straight line as the mouth. And they depicted the different moods of Norwegians. And the last one was a happy face. And the first 4, I think, was like sad, happy, angry. And it was only a straight line for the mouth. So it wasn't any emotions. And the only happy one was when they were drunk. And I've lived here so many years, so I know that even though we can laugh about it, it's kind of true, Emotions is best visible in Norway when people are drunk. That's sad, but that's how it is. If you go to other countries around the world, you get a lot of emotions, even when people are not drunk. So the thing is, to come back to your question, I found out lately that what helps me best is to have been working out. So I usually try to schedule a workout routine before I go in some conversations that I know are going to be tough, so that I can stay grounded. That helps me a lot. I try to be try to not be in a rush, so I can calm down and have a couple of minutes before I enter the room and before I enter a meeting to really check in, with myself. so I can be available for the meeting, and also for the parties that are gonna use me as a someone who's gonna help them find out about situations they are in. Usually I'm brought in as a mediator, and of course it's especially important in those settings that it's not going to be about me. So I try to think about what I say, how I said it, what kind of words I use, and also what kind of body language I show, so that I will be so much out of focus as possible, but helping these parties to go along. And that also happens when I'm in as a mentor. I usually try to leave my experiences outside of the conversation. So I try to read back the mentees' experiences and try to help them with the questions I ask, to see if I can make them see things in a different light than the usual lighting that or the point of view that they have. My experience is if you have good questions and if you dare to ask them, it will help them to see things in different lighting.
I think this is such a good point, that you're going to be out of focus, which might also take some of the responsibility or the fear out of the setting, because I think it's very easy here that many of us, we have a fixing mindset. Okay, that person is upset, we need to fix it.
Yeah.
And then you need to know all the right things to say. But if that's not how you enter, then it gets much easier just being present and being there with the person, asking a few questions. So then what would some good questions be? If the person, let us say, the person is struggling with their job-seeking process. It could be anything in life, but they've had a hard blow, maybe a rejection, and it's kind of just the last drop.
Great question, Alan. And I want to answer this, but first I want to answer it with a question. And this is something I found, I reflected over during my adult years. And we got a lot of feelings. Humans have a lot of feelings, and some of them are nice, we like them, and some of them we're trying to avoid. I thought about this studying psychology, and I thought that as a parent, you never run to a child and give them an ice cream and say, just stop laughing and you'll have this ice cream. That never happens, but that happens if they're crying, if they're sad. We just run to them and okay, don't cry, don't be sad, I'll give you an ice cream or a chocolate or whatever. Why are we differentiating between these feelings, Who is this about? Why do we want to bribe them out of the sadness, but we encourage the laughter and the happiness? So using that to answer the question you asked, I think it's not bad to be sad. Of course, if you get a lot of rejections, you need to be sad. And I see a lot of people trying to move other people out of sadness and into a happy state really fast. And by doing so, they don't work on their sadness. They don't really take a look into their sadness and see what is it about. Is it a rejection? Or is it that it maybe gives me another view of myself than I used to have? What is it about? So I think before moving out of sadness, we need to look at sadness and see, why are we sad? What is it doing to us? And where do we need to be, or where do we want to be, before we start to plan our way out of sadness? That doesn't mean I like people being depressed or sad, because depressed is another state that I think people not processing sadness to the full, and only getting new confirmations on why they need to be sad, and they don't use the energy to do anything. They will end up in a depression. in psychology it's called helplessness, and if they see that, okay, I'm in a situation that I can't do anything about, then it's difficult to get out. But long answer to your question, but to answer it short, I think the best thing is to see, why are you sad? What is it about? And then regarding and taking the answer into account and see, okay, where do we need to go from here, and what do we need to do? And then we can move out of it. So don't bribe people out of sadness. Let people be sad, let them process it, and then we can move to a more required or requested state.
This is so interesting to hear, and I really enjoy when someone puts words or puts some sort of understanding into something that I've observed myself. My wife is from Brazil, and whenever we have, or she has a problem, I definitely do this bribing. I just wanted to stop. I just wanted to stop feeling sad, because it's heartbreaking and it's uncomfortable. Most I don't know where to position myself, and we've had a lot of conflicts because she doesn't want me just to make a joke, or just to distract her basically into something else, or bribe her, as you say. So that's super interesting.
It is uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable, and just imagine how that plays out in a boardroom or in a colleague or a leader conversation. You've called someone in and you want to give them feedback on the work performance, and you've been waiting to do that for maybe 2 years, because this is so uncomfortable that people used to postpone it as much as they can, and when they finally want to do it, they are like fed up, and they really want to have a conversation about this, and then maybe the employee starts crying or gets angry, and the conversation takes a whole other shift. Then you're getting out of the planned conversation, and what happens is that they bribe the person out of sadness or angry, and then they go back and having this boiling inside them, because they haven't been able to say the things that needed to be said. And then it explodes again in 1 year or 2 years, and it gets ugly, Because when I come into these kind of settings, I usually say that, why didn't you talk about this 6 months ago, 1 year ago? And usually it's always the same thing. We are so afraid of these feelings, and they are so uncomfortable, that we try to postpone them as much as possible. And usually when we take these conversations, it's already too late.
That's a very good point. And transferring this to a mentor relation, because as a mentor, you are the closest person to your mentee that is from the Norwegian labor market. So you kind of have this double, both knowing the field of the person, but also having quite a close relation, which means that you might often be in a unique position to actually see what is wrong, and have the proximity to actually be able to say it in a good way, kind of to give honest but uncomfortable feedback, which I know is probably the worst part of the mentor role, or at least some of the most difficult. How to do this, how to tackle this as a mentor?
I think it boils down to what you said, how to give an honest but maybe uncomfortable, honest and uncomfortable feedback. Because, the comfortable feedbacks people are getting from all over the place. They don't need to listen to you give them more of the same feedback, about the comfortable feedbacks. So as a mentor, I think it's important to be serious about your role, and also try to see that if this uncomfortable feedback makes the mentee unhappy with you, that's okay. But try to build up trust before you get there. And I usually use that I usually use the couple of conversations in the beginning to try to build up trust, and try to tell them who I am and what I do and how I do it, so that when uncomfortable feedback is necessary, they will know that, oh, I heard him say he's a crazy guy, whatever. It's not about me, it's about him. It's about how he gives feedbacks. Of course, you try to give the feedback in a precise but not over-exaggerated way. You just need to convey the information, but you don't need to slaughter the person. You need to give the conversation give the feedback so that the person can use that to evolve and move from one state to another state. So that's an intention of the feedback, not to be cocky or to be naughty or nasty or whatever. Just need to give a feedback so that the person can move from one state to another state. So and remember that it's not about you. So if the mentee gets angry with you, you can go back afterwards and try to repair. But my experience is that some people, they need to have someone to give them the honest feedback, because everybody else is not being dishonest, but it's being afraid of the reaction. So people don't give the honest feedback. That's why you meet a lot of people with their convention that I don't get a job because I'm foreigner, or I'm black, or yellow, or green, or blue, or whatever. They have this superficial explanations, and it's okay, it might be that, but what can we do with it now? And there are a lot of green and blue and black people who have jobs. They got black hair or blue hair or green hair. They are straight, or they are gay, or they are thick, or they are thin. Whatever. What can you do? And what do you want to do? And also saying that you got two options. Either you give up, or you fight on. If you choose to give up, then I guess we're over. But if you need to fight on, or if you want to fight on, we need to, we take all of these things into account, but there is nothing we can do with people. Usually there's nothing to do with, you can't do anything with your appearance, your background. You can't change that, So let's leave that there and see what we can work on. And if you need or want to work, we can do that together. But if you want to give up, or if you want someone to affirm or agree with you on that, okay, you don't get a job because of your background or appearance or whatever, you can get that with a friend, or a sister or a brother or whatever, if you just need someone to agree with you. A mentor is going to help you go from one place to another place, and that's what we're going to do. So if you just need someone to agree, use a friend.
As a job seeker, how to fight on, because you meet so many rejections. It's very hard psychologically. But you still have this rational understanding that you need to fight on, because the other option, as you said, then it's over if you give up. But then how to actually find the energy or the strength to fight on in practice?
As human beings, as I told you in the beginning of this interview, we are told that, okay, you need to you need to get good grades so you can get a job, and then when you have the good grades and a good job, then you will earn the big money, and then you will live a happy life. The downside of that is that if you manage to do all this before you retire, you find out, whoa, I've done it, and what is this about? I'm 40. Right now I'm 40. I got maybe 40 years to go, and not that I'm a millionaire or whatever, but the life, our purpose should be more than just making the good grades, getting the good job, earning the big money. Life is really short. And if it's all you're trying to get, then you'll get a huge disappointment. And that disappointment you will have the ability to meet twice in your life. One time is when you retire, because I've talked to a lot of people, retired and to be retired. And sometimes I see that the meaning in their eyes is gone. They are thinking about what they have used their life for, and sometimes they are full of regrets, and they try to think about or wish how they could change things if they could have another try at it. Maybe they wanted to go another way in the work experience. They want to do something else. You got a director who wants to be a, programmer or whatever, do something different. But when you're retired, that's too late. It's difficult to go back. When you are in Norway, you retire around 70. And it's not too late, but it's a bit late to start over. But as a unemployed person, you got the opportunity to decide, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? If you get unemployed as a 30-year-old or 40-year-old, you still have 40 years to go, 30 years to go. So look at it as a great opportunity to take a look inside and outside. Who am I? And where do I want to be when I retire? That's a great opportunity. So, and your question was how to stay motivated, and I think the thing is I usually tell my mentees that they tell me that they've been applying jobs all day, whole week. And I said, that's too much. First of all, you don't need, there aren't that many jobs out there, so you can use so much time, Second of all, job seeking should be a part of your plan for the day. If job seeking gets to be everything and all that you do, then you're up for a huge, huge disappointment, And I think not only job seeking, but also the job. When you get in a job, it shouldn't be all that you do and your whole identity, because then again, if that becomes your whole identity, you're up for a huge disappointment when you turn 70 and retire, because then your identity is gone. Who are you? And to start finding out who you are as a 70-year-old, that's not a journey I recommend for people, And then you get bitterness. And I usually say that bitterness is not a good friend for life, So try to get the bitterness on a distance. Try to find out who you are. When you find out who you are, then decide what you want to do, instead of starting to do things and letting that define who you are. A lot of people are directors. When they retire and they give away their director title, it's difficult for them to find out who they are.
This is such a good point. And I think it's an important mindset as well, seeing it not just as hopelessness, but actually as an opportunity to redirect a bit your path.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity. Yeah.
But how to kind of keep that mindset, because I know that people who are looking for a job, this insecurity can consume them. And I actually spoke with a job seeker yesterday who had been looking for jobs for quite a while and was starting to really lose motivation. But at the same time, I saw that this was someone who was really proactive. She had been sending out messages. She was speaking with me. And all of these things are some of the key success criteria, at least in my experience, that if you are that proactive, you're quite likely to find a job. It might take a couple of more months, even longer, but it will usually work out. And if she could have the same kind of confidence as I have, that in a couple of years you'll look back and you'll think, why was I so worried? Why wasn't I able to enjoy those years a bit more? Because if you can here and now realize that it's probably going to work out, then that gives you some space to enjoy. what do you think about this, and are there other ways that you can really use this moment, that turn this moment from something really difficult to actually being the opportunity that you say it could be?
You know, when you're in it, it's difficult to see that there is a light in the end of this tunnel. That's difficult. So and it's also not only difficult to see, but it's also difficult to hear, because people coming and saying that, oh, it's going to be all right, and it's like, oh my God, who is this happy fella, you know? So I usually don't. I try not to say those things because I know how it feels to hear them. But when I was a kid, I used to say I used to say this to myself, that everything ends up well. When I got a little bit older, I added a little bit to that, and I said everything ends up well as long as you don't give up. And the core substance of depression is overgeneralizing, you know, thinking that this situation I'm in is going to last forever. I'm not going to get out of it. You know, that's the core substance of depression. You know, that you're in a state that you will think that will last forever. You don't see the light in the end of the tunnel, and if you see that, you see it as a meeting train, and you don't see it as an exit. There are different ways to approach it, and I after I answer the question, I wish to talk a little bit about motivation, that I think is over exaggerated, you know. But on a practical thing, I usually tell people to do one of two things to get that motivation right there and then. The first one is to assemble IKEA furniture. I tell people before they go to interview, try to find easy IKEA furniture and try to assemble that. And they start laughing. But when we get into it, I'm telling them that it's not about the furniture; it's about the feeling of accomplishment. You know, when you do that, I think people there should be a study about it when they assemble a furniture, and if there are any oxytocin or serotonin or dopamine or whatever in their bodies that should be tracked. I think that would be fun. Of course, it's a bit impractical to go around assembling IKEA furniture. So the more practical thing is to start working out. A lot of people, they think about working out for appearances. But if they knew what working out does for your mental state, or as people are being, or has been said, that if it was a pill, if a workout was a pill, everybody would take it, and that's not for the appearances. That's for the mental state. So going back to my answer about job seeking shouldn't be everything you do. You should always try to allocate time for doing the workout. And not just walking in a park, you know, doing the hard workout which really gets you sweating to keep up the mentality that you need to have. Because I usually also tell my mentees that the bad thing about depression or sadness in general is that if you get an interview, the guy or girl or the team that is interviewing you, they will see this. It doesn't matter if you're a really good programmer or excellent skills in whatever, you know. Because working is, one part of working is to getting the job done. The second part is the social aspect of it, you know. And even though you can do the job, it's difficult to have a coworker or colleague who is draining you, you know. So that's something that you should also think about. It's not only the things you do, it's also who you are. So you should express confidence, I'm not saying that people need to go around being a Duracell rabbit, you know. I'm just saying that if you get depressed, that it shows in the interviews. and you should be aware of that. I did my master thesis on the relationship between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation and how that affects us. And as a guy, I had a journey with my lifestyle when I went from 155 kilograms to 85 kilograms. That's 70 kilograms. I'm not going to talk about how or what I did, but the thing is that my lifestyle now is, or the gym or workout is a huge part of my lifestyle, and not because of my appearance, but because I think that it does have huge benefits on my mental state. And I meet a lot of people coaching that tell me that they are not motivated for working out, and I usually say that's great. There are times I wake up, I'm not motivated to be a father, I'm not motivated to be a husband, I'm not motivated to be myself either. And who of us haven't woken up on a Monday and thinking we are not motivated to go to work? But we still do it, you know. We still go to work on Mondays, we still are parenting, we're still trying to be a good spouse, trying. So I think motivation is exaggerated. So you can, at least for me, I see motivation as a extra boost that is good to have when I need it. But the routines are the things that get the job done. So that's actually what I used to say to my mentees when I start or coaches or whoever I'm talking to. In the beginning, you have a lot of motivation. You're applying for jobs right and left and everywhere, and you're up and down. I try to hold them back a bit and try to ask them to use the motivation to establish a good routine. Because motivation is, it can be compared to love. When you meet your spouse or girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever in the beginning of a relationship, if you use up that motivation or the love, the rest of the relationship is going to be tough. So use the motivation to establish good routines, so that the routine can take you longer when the motivation stops. And then you will have a burst of motivation here and there. That's a good thing, but that should be like an extra and not a driving factor.
And having a good routine also drives achievement, because if you work at it every day, you will do it much better, you'll see the results. Is this something that seeps back into motivation?
Yeah, I think so. You know, there is doing things and seeing results, and after a while trying to value the things you do. That's a way to like feed your motivation. You know, I've been working out for 3 years. I still really don't like what I call leg days, but I still do it. You know, it's not about the motivation; it's about the routine. So, and I need and I get the good motivation on the other workouts, and I enjoy it a lot. But still, after 3 years, I still don't like leg days, but I still do it.
That's good. There are those who skip them, and
yeah, we all know how that is.
Motivation and routines. I feel that there is a third aspect to this, which is identity, how we see ourselves.
Yeah.
Most of my life, I used to absolutely hate learning languages, and I couldn't seem to do it because I had this picture of myself as someone who simply couldn't learn languages. I was a numbers person, and now I speak 6 of them, and I teach how to learn languages because I changed my routines, which again boosted motivation, which again made me see myself as someone who is actually good at learning languages. And this is something that is applicable to a lot of things. If you see yourself as someone who eats healthy instead of someone who eats unhealthy, it will make it easier. It will make it natural. At least that is what many people talk about.
Yeah.
What would you say is the relationship between these routines and then this actually shift in identity?
Great. First of all, I didn't know you speak 6 languages. We need to talk about that when we're done with this. That's so impressive. To answer your question, I think it's the first thing that I think about when I hear you say that is what is called visualizing in psychology. You try to visualize a state or an end state that is something you like, and that makes it easier to achieve. If you see yourself as you see yourself on graduation day, and you start to visualize that image, and that will also help you motivate to do the work that is need to be done to get on that end state. You talked about identity, and I think that's a great project, for at least I think every human being. A lot of our identity is something that we have, we believe in because we're told from we are young, who we are, what we like, what we don't like, and we tend to believe it. And a lot of people, they don't look inwards; they only look outwards and go on with the goals that sometimes they found out weren't their own goals. There were goals which needed to be achieved to fulfill the identity that they were told that they have. So I think stopping up and thinking about what makes me happy, what is important for me. That should be something that I will recommend people to do more often, so that they try to align what they do more with who they want to be, i.e. the identity.
We're talking a bit about identity, how we can shape our identity, how we have some control through our routines, our habits. And you also said that there are 2 moments in life where we enter huge insecurity, or we don't know necessarily who we are, retirement being one of them, because we leave our identity at work. How are those 2 connected? How can we mitigate the difficulties in a huge change of situation like this, retirement, through having a more aware connection through our identity throughout life?
Great question, and just to say that of course there might be other situations in life when these things are really under question. One might also be if you are in a breakup, if you've been in a long relationship, you start to identify yourself as a spouse or whatever, and when that relationship breaks up, you might get to a point where you start to doubt who you are. And also it might also be when it's called the empty nest syndrome, when the kids finally or hopefully leave the house. You start to think more about who are you now. You're so used to being a parent, you're used to being a spouse. So I think the thing that might help is to try to see if what you do is a part of who you are and not your whole identity. If you're working somewhere as a IT programmer or a director or a salesman or whatever, that's what you do, which is part of your identity, but you're also so much more. If you're a spouse, that's part of who you are, but you're also so much more. So when one of these things change or is not there anymore, it doesn't need to affect your whole identity. Of course, if you're a director and that's the only thing you are, if you're a mom or a father and that's the only thing you are, if you're a spouse and that's the only thing you are, then changes to that might affect your identity in a profound way, which might be such a huge shock, which might end up being difficult to maneuver. So my advice is to try to see and form your identity around different things that are important to you, and also try to allocate time to all of those parts of your identity. So if you're an employee, if you're working somewhere, try to do something else also. A lot of people, as I said earlier, I've been talking to a lot of people during my time, and you meet these hugely successful people with doing like enormous things, and when you start talking to them, you see that that's their whole identity. They've been using all of their time, like they've been doing the necessary things. They've been sleeping, not so much as they should. They've been eating, but all of the rest has been allocated to that one thing, and they've done great jobs, and they are being shown as examples or front figures and huge characters in their field, but they haven't done anything else. Those people usually are in for a huge surprise when retirement comes, or unemployment, or the third one, which is unfortunately burnout. Then they have to re-establish their whole identity, because the one thing they excelled in is not there anymore, or is not available. So they need to rearrange their whole identity, and it's a tough job, especially if you have different things around in your life to try to handle also.
And this rearranging of one's identity, is that simply by doing other things as well, discovering other aspects, or are there other ingredients to this?
I think this is such a it's such a huge question, and I'm not so. There are a lot of other people who can answer this question much better than I can. But I think the thing I would say is that usually the thing that you will have when you're in this situation that you should take advantage of is time, because when the thing you have been doing all the time is not there anymore, then you suddenly have a lot of time. Use that wisely, and try to use that to look inwards instead of just throwing yourself on the bike again and trying to get to that same position or the same life as you had. Look inwards, see what makes me happy, what makes me angry, what makes me sad, what makes me don't care, and try to align your life so that you can do more of the things that is important to you. And when you find those things, it will also shed a light on your values. And I think a lot of people go through life without knowing about their values, and that's something I think more people should spend time thinking about. What is important to me?
One of the first things we spoke about in this conversation was that how you talk to someone, not just the things you say, but also your tone of voice, how you come across, it has a direct impact on how they not just interpret, but also how they feel. And I think there are many people who kind of draw a very distinct line. I am just the way I am, and then it's up to the other person if they take it or leave it, or if it's not my problem if they interpret what I say in a negative manner. But I think this is what you're saying, and I completely agree, is that we do have a lot of impact. The way we walk around in the world have an impact on the people that we cross on our path. How can we be more aware of this, and how can we use this in a sense to spread more care and more happiness, not just in the workplace, but in our relationships throughout the day?
A great question. I think you know that's a two-edged sword. How you might be interpreted. I think in a workforce, I meet a lot of leaders that are so afraid of how they might come across, so that they usually don't convey their message in a clear way, which on the other hand leaves the employee in a situation where she or he is they don't catch what the leader was saying because it was so unclear, because the leader was afraid of how he or she might come across. So I think there are two sides of that. The one is that you get so afraid of being misinterpreted that you don't dare to say things that should be said. And the other one is what I call I use the slang, the cowboy leader, you know, which is exactly the thing you said. It's like, I am this way, and I'm gonna be how I am and who I am, and anyone can interpret me as they want. I'm going straight ahead, you know, and that's like two extremes. So in Norway, a lot of vacancies, they write that we like you to be clear. In Norwegian they call it tydelig, which is a funny thing, because I think my interpretation of Norwegians is that, or let me rephrase that, I understand why they write it in their vacancies, and the thing about being tydelig or clear for me is that you have to be as clear as the situation and the person or the person and the situation is requiring, you know, because the purpose of clearness is to convey a message so it can't be misunderstood, but you have to try to adjust it so that it doesn't kill the other person, you know. Of course, there are in different cultures, clearness is conceived differently, and also in different personality types. You know, you got the cowboy leader, as I said. He or she needs a much tougher and clearer message than the one who is already maybe a little fragile. You know, if you use the same clearness on both of these, you might get the cowboy leader who is like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't understand. Can you just be more clear? Tell me how it is. And if you use that on the one who is fragile, you might like do real huge harm, you know, so that the person never recovers. So about clearness, I think you, as a coach, a leader, or a mentor, you have to really tune in to this other person. Who is this person? And also the situation, you know. I use an example. If you get if there is a fire, you know, you can't go around thinking how you might be conceived, you know. You need to get people out of the building, you know, and then you can go back and repair everything else later, you know. There should be short, direct messages to get people evacuated from the building. But luckily, there is not always fires, so then you have to see, okay, how should I say this so that my message is coming across and the person is receiving it, and not being like hostile or more dominant than I need to be. So and that's a real effort, and that's something I work with every day, trying to tune in. You might be more clearer than the situation required or the person required, and if you have built a good foundation in the relationship, you might also be telling that if I come across, if my intentions are perceived not the way I want them to, I hope that you can tell me so that I can go back and see where I missed, so I can repair. Because if you can, I think in a healthy relationship, you should be able to say the things that is important, and you should also rely on the other person to give you feedback on how they hear you and receive the messages you're saying, so that you can go back and repair. Because if you're always afraid of not being, or if you're afraid of offending the other person, or how they might feel, or whatever, that might hold back the conversation to the degree that the conversation becomes really shallow. It's no value in it. So if there is a thing I would advise, is to build a good foundation, and then you will say that there might be a situation in our conversation which might be where I come across not the way I want to. And if that happens, I would really appreciate if you could give me a feedback on how you perceived my conversation or message or whatever, so we can go back and see if that was a mishap. I can repair it, saying sorry, or maybe I'm just okay. Let's talk about it. How did that affect you, and why do you think that affected you the way it did? So if we get this two-way communication, because one thing is what I'm saying, the other thing, which is a whole different thing, is what you are hearing. And something happens from the words leave my mouth till it receives your ear, that I need to be aware of, either reading your body language or listening to words you're telling me on the feedback.
And Sam, you get in and assist companies when there is a difficult situation, sometimes a very difficult situation that you say should have been preferably handled months or years ago. Yeah. Are there any common patterns to behaviors on both sides leading to this situation?
Yes, they are. And the most common thing is that I usually, after a while, I go in and one of the first things I tell the parties is that even though I'm getting paid by one of you, I'm only loyal to my values. And the values in my company is to be fair and not to try to trick people. Because that's something I don't like. Even not because there are a lot of people contacting me which have been tricked in the company they have worked for. And if they don't have money to pay for the help they need, I do that for free, because I really don't like people taking advantage of their power. So the first thing I say that I'm loyal to my values, and I'm also loyal to doing a good job. And I think that's really important when you're coming in as a mediator, so that everybody knows that you're working to solve their issue and not to cash in the most money. So the thing I see a lot of times when I go into conversations with the parties, first I will have a conversation with each part by themselves, and then if it's possible, we will meet all of us and try to have a conversation and to see if we can get to solve these issues. And if there is one thing that usually is apparent in all of these conflicts, is that it usually started with a minor detail, which is like something that if you had talked about it when it occurred, it would be solved like 6 months ago or a year ago. Because I usually go back and see that the problem we are talking about, or the huge conflict we are talking about now, I usually go back and see that it started with a minor thing that was maybe a little uncomfortable, which everybody was hoping would go away. And then this just snowballs, and it evolves to this huge problem. Maybe it's 6 months or a year after, that when we're trying to solve the problem, we find out that, whoa, this is we're talking about this, but the problem is like something, a whole another thing, you know. The thing is that when this snowball effect comes into effect, the conflicts usually tend to be more about the persons rather than the issue, you know. And when we are talking about the conflicts in between persons, they are not trusting each other. They are thinking negatively of each other, and it's more complicated than to talk about the issues, because the issue is there, but the person is here. So the thing I see most is if you take action when things started to be a little not normal, it will be much easier and much cheaper to solve than if you come in like a year after and then try to solve it.
Sam, if you could speak for 60 seconds, 1 minute, and what you said would be seen by everyone or heard by everyone in the whole world, how would you spend these 60 seconds?
Whoa, that's a huge question. But I think if it was going to be heard by people around the world, I think the thing I would say that is the most important thing for me in my life right now is that life is short, and by the time you find out how short it is and how fast it is going, it might be late. But and at the end of the day, when you're reaching, when you have reached your destination, there is actually nothing you can take away with you. Whatever you have accomplished, whatever you have accumulated of wealth, will be left outside, and then you will go to your final destination. And I think that if you but the only thing that doesn't go in the grave with you is how you made other people feel around you, you know, because those people and their memories will remain long after you're gone. And when you think about it, there are not. We tend to go around. Thinking about ourselves in the world as hugely important or meaningful. But when you think about people before you, there are not so many generations back you can remember or even know about of your own generation. You know, I don't remember my great-grandfather, but he might have had a lot of issues with whatever, you know, and big things and small things. I don't know who he is, you know. Just one generation after, you're all forgotten, you know. So I think people tend to think about themselves or their lives as much more important than that it really is. And I usually say that I have been to the mountaintop, and what I saw, it was not so interesting. So climbing down the mountain, the thing that gives me pleasure is to see that there are a lot of people who are less fortunate, not because they are less gifted. They are much more gifted than me, but they weren't just as lucky as I am. So it's a lot about luck, either genes or social coincidences. But if I can use the time I have to give people who need a hand, to help them get up and doing the things they can and really do fulfill their potential, then that gives me a lot of pleasure. So instead of accumulating wealth for myself, which I will not be able to take with me, try to give a hand to people around you, and not only because it gives pleasure to the ones you're helping, but also it gives a huge amount of pleasure for the ones doing it. Yeah.
That's a really well spent, a bit more than a minute, but really well spent time.
I usually do.
We have a tradition where each guest, they leave a question for the next guest and for the audience, a challenge. So I'm wondering, what in the spirit of this, what challenge would you leave to the next person and those listening in terms of how to have a more positive impact either on yourself or the world around you, or both?
Yeah, another great question. I'm usually brought in when I'm supposed to solve challenges, not give challenges. But I'm not foreign to giving challenges either. I think the greatest challenge, which is actually one of your questions, is to ask, who are you doing this for? Who are you doing this for?
That's very nice.
Because I think if you really look inside and see who am I doing this for? Am I doing it for me, for my reputation, my resume, or am I doing it for this other person? And if you really dive into that question and answer it for yourself, it will affect the way you're a mentor in a whole nother, or a leader or whatever, you know. If you really go in and solve that for yourself, or answer a question for yourself, it will help you doing the things you're doing in a much better way.
Sam, thank you so much. It was wonderful talking to you. I had a couple of questions planned, but then the answers were so interesting, so we went down different paths, and that's really good, because then we discovered, at least I discovered, lots of new insights. It was super informative, but also very enjoyable. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time, and we should do this again sometime.
Absolutely.
Yeah.